Shalom from Israel to all of Daystar viewers around the world. I am Moshe Bar Tzvi, the producer of Israel Now News. We at Israel Now News are dedicated to bringing you the full story and the truth about Israel from Israel. It's written in the Holy Bible, when David said in Psalm 43:3, "O send out your light and your truth. Let them lead us. Let them bring us to your holy hill and to your tabernacle." And God says in Zechariah 8:31, "I will return to Zion and dwell in the midst of Jerusalem. Jerusalem shall be called the city of truth, the mountain of the Lord of hosts, the holy mountain. Always search for the truth, and the truth shall set you free." John 8:31. I hope you enjoyed the program. God bless you from Jerusalem. Shalom, shalom.
Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Yochanan El-Rom.
And I'm Erin Viner.
In our top story, Israeli Defense Minister Ehud Barak said that the nuclear talks with Iran have bought the hardline Islamic Republic at least 5 weeks to further its nuclear program. In an interview with CNN's Christiane Amanpour, Barak spoke about the Muslim belief in a practice called taqiyya, which grants Muslims the right to lie in order to deceive non-Muslims for the sake of Islam. He said the Iranians have a history of deceiving the world, sometimes through steps like this. "I am realistic enough not to be optimistic about the talks with Iran. It is clear that the Iranians are focused on reaching nuclear capability, and they are ready to defy and deceive the whole world to do it."
The State of Israel declared independence on May 14, 1948. The very next day, the small state was attacked by 7 Arab armies. With God's help, Israel prevailed. The Arab world refers to May 15th as the day of the catastrophe, or Nakba in Arabic, and marks the date with protests and violence against the Jewish state. Masses of demonstrators rushed Israel's border with Syria last year, and 100 succeeded in forcing their way into the country. The IDF, which is known for its efforts to exercise humane defense, has reinforced the barrier on the northern border, and snipers have been cautioned to employ non-fatal tactics, including targeting of the legs of those who may attempt to again illegally enter Israel. Israeli intelligence sources are reporting that a large turnout is expected again this Nakba Day, and the IDF has already initiated advanced training ahead of next month.
Egypt has terminated a long-term natural gas deal with Israel. Last week, officials in Cairo announced that they have decided to permanently halt the flow of gas through the Egyptian-Israeli pipeline. This announcement comes after the pipeline was vandalized on the Egyptian side of the border for the 14th time. Egypt supplies 40% of Israel's natural gas, and Israel is facing an energy crisis this summer. The public is being warned to expect blackouts, and the cost of electricity has already risen 20%. Israeli Finance Minister Yuval Steinitz said that he was deeply concerned over the unilateral Egyptian announcement terminating the gas deal with Israel, both because of its diplomatic and economic aspects. This is a dangerous precedent that diminishes the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel.
The United Nations and its OCHA, Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, joined the UNRWA Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees in writing a condemnatory letter of Israel against the demolition of 21 illegally constructed buildings by Bedouins. Israel also evicted 14 Palestinians who were illegally squatting in 2 buildings in the Beit Hanina neighborhood of East Jerusalem. After an 8-year legal battle, the eviction took place after the Jewish families were found to be the rightful owners of the property by a court of law. Since the eviction, Israel has been criticized by the United Nations, which is accusing Israel of illegally occupying the area and referring to the Palestinians as refugees. According to the UN statement, Jewish ownership of property in East Jerusalem is a settlement and illegal under international law.
Last week, a group of Israeli soldiers from the Kedem Battalion saved the life of a 10-day-old Palestinian baby. The mother of the sick child brought her baby to the IDF checkpoint in Samaria. When the soldier on duty noticed the mother was anxious, he immediately called the battalion's physician. The doctor realized the baby was in respiratory distress and administered first aid to stabilize her condition. Other soldiers arranged for an ambulance to take the child to the hospital in Ramallah. Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Michael Fendlar, the attending physician, said, This is the third such incident at an Israeli checkpoint in just 2 weeks. The Palestinians from nearby villages know that we have a regimental infirmary and a military ambulance. He said last time one of the paramedics on duty treated a young girl suffering from meningitis, and during the third incident, I treated a girl who had severe jaundice. In both incidents, the patients were transferred to an Israeli hospital for additional medical care.
The Commander-in-Chief of Israel's Air Force, Major General Ido Nehushtan, has been awarded the Legion of Merit from the Commander of the United States Air Force, Norton Schwartz. According to a press statement released after the awards ceremony, since July of 1942, the Legion of Merit has been awarded to those who have made outstanding contributions to the security field. Major General Nehushtan has performed meritorious service during his 37-year career with the Israeli Air Force and solidified military ties between the United States and Israel. He's also promoted Israel's participation in the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter program. Israel's Air Force frequently shares intelligence on terrorist organizations in the region, which has assisted its U.S. counterpart in overseas contingency operations in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Major General Nehushtan's exemplary performance, dynamic leadership, and exceptional devotion to duty reflect great credit upon himself, the Israeli Air Force, and his country.
More than 5,000 people have signed an online petition urging the Olympic Committee to observe a moment of silence in memory of 11 Israeli athletes who were brutally murdered by Palestinian terrorists at the Munich Olympics in 1972. Since 1976, families of the 11 Israeli Olympians have requested a moment of silence at the Olympic Games and have repeatedly been turned down. A spokesman for the families said the 11 murdered athletes were members of the Olympic family. We feel they should be remembered within the framework of the Olympic Games.
On Wednesday of last week, the State of Israel collectively mourned the loss of 22,993 fallen soldiers and victims of terror. Yom HaZikaron is a day that the nation honors the memories of IDF troops killed in action and those who were murdered in terrorist attacks. This year, 126 names have been added to the list of war and terror fatalities. Memorial Day services began at 8 p.m. on Tuesday when a 1-minute siren was sounded and the entire country stood in silent tribute to those who have fallen. On Wednesday, Israel stood in silence for 2 minutes before ceremonies were held at Mount Herzl. Thousands of Israeli teenagers marched from Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust Museum, to Mount Herzl, Israel's military cemetery, to honor 275 Holocaust survivors who died fighting for Israel's independence after escaping death at the hands of the Nazis in Europe.
After marking the pain that our nation has endured, the State of Israel began to celebrate. As the sun set on Yom HaZikaron, Memorial Day, Israelis fired up their barbecue grills and celebrated Israel's Independence Day. 64 years ago, on May 14, 1948, the 5th of Iyar on the Hebrew calendar, after more than 2,000 years of exile, the Jewish people were restored to their homeland. Just as the prophet Ezekiel said, "I will take you out of the nations. I will gather you from all the countries and bring you back to your land." The State of Israel is a modern miracle and a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Children once again play in the streets of Jerusalem, as Zechariah prophesied. And just as Isaiah promised, God has made the barren deserts of Israel blossom. We at Israel Now News would like to wish all of our viewers a happy Israel Independence Day. Chag Ha'atzmaut Sameach.
And that concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein, and we're here on a beautiful day in Jerusalem on our rooftop studio. Our guest today is Rabbi Tradbergs, representative of the Rabbinical Council of America. Rabbi, thank you for being on the show.
Thanks, Josh.
Rabbi, your organization represents over 1,000 Orthodox rabbis in North America. Why are Jews and Christians coming together in such an important way?
So, Josh, I think that there's two things, really. One is that we're seeing a secularization of the world, and as a result of that, we have common interests. We both are religious groups of people. We're both believers, and we believe in ethics and the common interests of man. The other thing which is dramatic, we're sitting here in Jerusalem. The prophecies have come true. God promised that the Jewish people would come back to the land of Israel, and we're here. We're seeing it. And I think that interest in the prophecies coming true is what Christians and Jews both believe in, and that's really brought us together in the modern world.
Of course, there's a scriptural precedence for Jews and Christians coming together. What are some of the prophecies that you speak about that are actually coming to pass that talk about Jews and Christians coming together?
Well, first of all, the Bible speaks, Isaiah speaks about this, Jeremiah and other prophets speak about the Jewish people coming back to the land of Israel, and that's happening, unprecedented in history, really, the Jewish people's return. And also, the Bible talks about the Jewish people being a light unto the nations, people coming back and celebrating the holidays, Jews and non-Jews together in Jerusalem. And we see that happening in our time, and that tells us that history is unfolding as a fulfillment of these prophecies.
This last week we've celebrated Memorial Day. It was a very solemn day, and then immediately afterwards we celebrate Independence Day. Why in Jewish tradition do we have that tradition of celebrating the sad and then immediately the happy?
Well, we see that in a number of different places. I think it has to do with appreciation. That certainly when it comes to Independence Day, we have this because others gave their lives, and we have to celebrate at the same time that we appreciate the losses that occurred to allow us to have this celebration.
Well, you're a new immigrant to Israel, a rabbi. How does it feel to come here, be here for the 64th birthday of Israel, and to celebrate and to see the prophecies being fulfilled? What does this mean to you to be here in Israel at this time?
Well, I think we're living in unprecedented times. I was a rabbi in Toronto for many years. Toronto's a great city. North America's a great place. We had freedom of religion. It's a wonderful place to be, and a wonderful place to be a Jew, to observe our religion. Freedom of religion was, the cornerstone of all of Western society, and that was a great life. But it's different living history. Being in this place, actually, as I say it, I get the shivers. Being in this place as a Jew in our historic homeland, controlling it and living our freedom, all our holidays here are Jewish holidays. Our Sabbath, there's nothing like Friday night in Jerusalem. When the Sabbath begins, we don't do work, we don't drive our cars. The whole city turns a different color. It looks different, it feels different, the clouds are different. You feel this is a Jewish place to live. This is where a Jew feels, I personally am living my Judaism in a different depth, a different relationship. We also believe God's presence resides here in this spot where we're sitting. God's presence is stronger, and your prayers are different, your religion is different, your observance is different, and you feel like you're walking together with God's presence.
One of the most frequently asked questions I get, and I truly just don't know the answer, is there are so many people in America and around the world who are Jews, who believe in the Bible, who recognize that God is fulfilling his prophecy here in Israel, yet they don't live in Israel. They haven't moved to Israel. They haven't made Aliyah. They haven't made immigration to Israel. Why are they still not living in Israel? What is the disconnect from the belief that God is fulfilling his prophecies in Israel and actually coming to Israel?
That's a good question. We can ask that question because we're here. We've done it. So I think, Josh, I think the answer to that is that we have promises of prophecies. The Jewish people are going to return to the land of Israel and build up the land, and the Messiah will come, and that's our messianic view. But, he could have done it in a magic carpet, picked us all up with a magic carpet, deposited us in a supernatural way, but for his, whatever he didn't do it that way. So it's not a magic carpet, and life here is tough. We believe in the fulfillment of the prophecies, but our neighbors don't. So I think that's part of the reason, is that it's a complicated world, and to move here is complicated.
Rabbi Tradbergs, there are literally tens of millions of people watching this show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
This magic carpet idea is really my message. We're living in a real world. We have struggles here. sometimes we feel very isolated, and the friendship of Christians, believing people, is so comforting, is so inspiring to us. It allows us to keep going, to feel we have a friend, to feel we're in this together. It allows us to keep going, and the friendship of the Christians world over is really a partnership with us to allow us to continue to see as all these prophecies unfold. We appreciate that, and we want you to continue it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi, for being on the show. And thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.
Up next, shining light from Israel.
امام عزیز فرمودی که باید مستکبرین جهان منهدم شوند.
Everybody knows that Iran wants to destroy Israel and the West.
زنگ شمارش معکوس
Everybody knows that they want to conquer the world.
انقلاب پیام جهانی است. ان شاء الله اسلام همه قله‌های جهان رو فتح خواهد کرد.
Everybody knows that they're either on the verge of acquiring nuclear weapons or they have them already.
یک ملت صاحب فناوری هسته است. اگر هم الان ندانند به زودی مجدداً زمانی که سرشون به سنگ خواهد خورد.
And everybody knows that they must be stopped. But why isn't anyone doing what we all know needs to be done? The answer is one word: fear. The psychological mechanism at play here is called cognitive dissonance. It's a subconscious denial of something so terrifying that the gravity of the threat is totally denied despite the catastrophic consequences of inaction. In Israel, we don't have the luxury of deluding ourselves with rose-colored glasses. For us, allowing ourselves the indulgence of cognitive dissonance would cost us our lives. Millions of them. We've been down that road before and we're not going to do it again. Have you ever considered the implications of a nuclear Iran?
A nuclear-armed Iran is going to spark an arms race in the Middle East and the greater region.
Whenever Iran has developed a new weapon that can be used against Israel, they've shipped it to Hezbollah. Now those missiles give Iran, through Hezbollah, the capability of hitting any target in Israel.
Once the Iranian missiles are up and running on launching pads in Lebanon, they can reach not just Israel, they can reach Western targets.
The Iranians carried out a test to launch a Scud missile from a barge in the Caspian Sea. Many people believe that this is what the Iranians would like to do with the United States, put a missile in a cargo ship going off of our coast. From 100 miles off our coast, we've never seen it.
When Mahmoud Ahmadinejad talks about a world without America not only being desirable but achievable, he could mean a strategic electromagnetic pulse attack.
An EMP weapon, meaning a small nuclear bomb, detonated above the center of the United States would literally take down the entire power grid of this country.
In the early 80s, Iraq was well on its way to completing construction of its own nuclear weapons. In 1981, the Israeli Air Force destroyed the Osirak reactor, preventing Iraq from becoming a nuclear power. At the time, the world predictably condemned Israel. The United States did as well. But a mere 10 years later, the US was thanking Israel for saving the world from the perils of a nuclear Iraq. When terrorists hijacked Air France Flight 139 full of Jews and held them hostage in Entebbe, we didn't appeal to the UN or seek diplomatic negotiations. In the most daring and miraculous rescue mission in history, we acted decisively, freeing the hostages and bringing our fellow Jews home. The international community should have learned the futility of appeasement of evil, of attempting to pacify tyrannical dictators. It just gives them the time they need to build their strength and implement their dark and murderous schemes. In Israel, we know this. We simply can't afford to wait for the possibility that the international community will garner up the courage to support us. It'll be too late. Too late for us and too late for the world. As the nation of Israel, we have been assigned the responsibility of being a light unto the nations. And as that light, we not only have the right to defend ourselves, but the obligation to defend the rest of humanity.
Please stay tuned for the ICEJ report from the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem.
What makes the miracles of Jesus even more miraculous? Standing where they happened, in Israel. Come explore Jerusalem, where Jesus opened blind eyes. Visit the hills of Galilee, where Jesus fed the multitude. Stroll through Capernaum, where Jesus lived and taught and healed. To learn more about standing where it all happened in Israel, visit www.goisrael.com. Come visit Israel.
You'll never be the same.
I'm David Parsons with the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, and we're here in Warsaw Ghetto Square at Yad Vashem on Yom HaShoah, Israel's official Holocaust Remembrance Day, and we've been part of the wreath-laying ceremony here to remember the 6 million victims of the Holocaust.
On Thursday, April 19th, in the warm spring sunshine, sirens sounded throughout Israel, and life came to a complete stop for 2 minutes as Israelis around the country paused to remember the tragedy of the Holocaust. Israeli dignitaries and leaders, including President Shimon Peres and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, gathered in the Warsaw Ghetto Square Memorial at Yad Vashem to honor the slain victims of the Holocaust. ICEJ Media Director David Parsons and ICEJ German Branch Director Gottfried Bühler placed a commemorative wreath on behalf of the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem.
We're here with Rosemary Schindler, the grandniece of Oskar Schindler, the Schindler's List movie. You're attending one of the Christian leadership seminar courses that we have here at Yad Vashem, bringing in Christian pastors, ministry leaders to learn how the lessons of the past are given to the next generation by this great institution. And what have you been learning this week, Mary?
We've been learning the details, the facts about the Shoah, the Holocaust, and how it was a factual event where 6 million perished at least. We know that there were millions, but it was 1/3 of the Jewish population, a tremendous cost to the world entire. And so we are here to be educated so that we can report accurately back to the schools, to our congregations, to the various organizations we're affiliated with, to be personal witnesses and voices of the past, so that never again will these atrocities take place, so that we can be trained to be righteous among the nations, to give people the examples that they need to have in their minds, prepared beforehand to know how to act in times where they're tested in coming days.
Many times we hear people say that Israel should stop talking about the Holocaust. Enough is enough, they say. Yet it is the American philosopher George Santayana who says that if we forget the past and the history, we are condemned to repeat it. And this is a very biblical principle. It is the prophet of Jeremiah who asks the people of Israel at one stage of their history, "Have you forgotten the wickedness of your fathers?" God wants us to remember where we come from, not to bring us into condemnation, but to prevent us from falling today into the same pits as yesterday. That means it's not just about remembering the past, but about shaping the present and the future. And this is exactly what our partnership with Yad Vashem is focused on. The ICJ just sponsored again a group of pastors from various parts of the world who came to Jerusalem to learn the tragic lessons of history, which is so much needed to be understood in our world today.
Apart from learning a lot more about the Holocaust, this is part of my personal journey. I think one of the things that's really impacted me is to realize the effect that this has had on the Jewish people, that there's barely a family in Israel that's not affected by the Holocaust. That's come through not just in the teaching, but also in the testimonies of the people that we've heard from.
The ICJ is committed not just to remembering the past, but with your help to make a lasting impact today and tomorrow. Our House for Holocaust Survivors in Haifa is bringing a real blessing here and now to many precious heroes who managed to survive Hitler's madness, as well as our partnership with Yad Vashem and the multiple pastors' conferences which took place on that unique institution. Please stand with us as we bless Israel and support the Jewish people. May the Lord bless you from Jerusalem.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Yochanan El-Rom.
And I'm Erin Viner. Please join us again next week for all your Israel updates.